Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man. Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Expert Podcast. I am Ben Pakulski, your host, and I'm so grateful to be able to record this podcast for you guys every week because I get to interview the smartest human beings on the entire planet under the preface of teaching you how to live your greatest life in your greatest body. And today is no exception. I interview two of my really great personal friends, Dr. Ted Achacoso and Mr. Roland Pankewich. These guys are absolute experts when it comes to the area of health optimization. And you know, whether you're trying to build your greatest body or just live your greatest life in this amazing world that we have, living a life around health optimization can be hard. It can be confusing. There's a lot of stuff that you need to know. These guys are the world's foremost experts when it comes to the microbiome, when it comes to mitochondria, and how to optimize it. So, Dr. Ted and Roland and I are going to go deep on the microbiome, understanding how leaky gut is affecting your life, things like Lipopolysaccharides, things like how to diversify your microbiome and live within this glyphosate-ridden world that we have. So many amazing insights into truthfully how to make the most of the world we live in and this microbiome that might just be the thing that is dictating your health, your brain, your function, your digestion, your body composition, all these amazing insights. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed interviewing these two gentlemen. Have an awesome day. And as always, if you enjoy it, listen right to the end because we've got some really great, interesting insights from Dr. Ted and Roland. All right, what's up, ladies and gents? Muscle Expert Podcast, Ben Pakulski. I'm here with two of my amazing friends and two of the most brilliant people that I know. Dr. Ted Achacoso, Mr. Roland Pankewich. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, sir. Truly an honor. So these guys are friends and mentors and just great human beings. I'm so grateful to have wonderful people like this to have this amazing discussion with. And sitting in front of us, we've got two research papers as well as probably thousands upon thousands in each of your brains. And we're going to talk today about the microbiome. We're going to talk about how it interacts with the mind, how it's influencing your brain, how it's influencing perhaps your mitochondria. And we're also going to talk about how exercise is influencing the microbiome. So, Dr. Ted, you brought these two papers in because you decided to do some research for me on the way, and I'm so grateful for that. And I want to talk to you about this. And this study in front of me reads the crosstalk between the gut microbiota and mitochondria during exercise. Tell me.
Yes. First, I'd like to lay out a background of the gut microbiota so that you know how really important it is. It's actually now considered as a separate organ in the body. It's called a postnatal organ, meaning it grows after you're born. So after you're born, it's supposed to be inoculated in the vaginal canal when you're born. And within the first year of life, it really becomes more unique as a fingerprint. And then after that, your fingerprint stays the same, but you begin to have a lot more of the bacterial species by 2 to 3 years of age. So that's very, very important. If you have kids, for example, and they were born by cesarean section, you see that they're actually more prone to allergies and a lot of immune problems. It's because of the improper growth of that postnatal organ. So when you disrupt this with stress, and exercise is one of the stresses, there will be changes that will be happening to the microbiota because they are organisms. They are part of you. There's about 2 kilos of that in you as an adult. So that's about 4.4 pounds, right? And so, and you should remember that everything that you eat from your supplements, your protein shakes, whatever you're taking, they are all pre-processed by your gut microbiota.
Right.
So, in fact, what's interesting, Ben, is there was a cancer drug that failed in 2015, and they were trying to find out why it failed in some and why it succeeded in others. Turns out that you actually needed 2 species of bacteria in order to make the drug work. So this is how important these organisms, because it actually pre-processes the drug for you, same way it pre-processes your food. So if you eat nasty food, you get nasty results. So that's the organ, and then there's the organ, and then there's the housing of the organ. The housing of the organ, of course, is your gut. So the gut is considered your second brain. So there's your gut microbiota, which is considered as an organ, and then your gut itself is considered as the second brain of the body. It actually is directly affected by the gut microbiota, because it's the gut microbiota that actually teaches your body what to recognize as foreign, and this is, I'm describing your immune function,
right.
Or not. So this will, if, for example, if you're taking a look at a lot of immune diseases, etc., many of them start by the improper teaching of the gut bacteria, to the gut lining that has all of your immune cells. Remember that the gut is now also the biggest immune organ. When I was in medical school, it was the bone, right? Because of bone marrow. But now we know that it's actually the gut. And then most recently, the new axis that has been formed is called the enteric microbiota gut-brain axis. When I was in medical school, it was just the gut-brain axis because we did not study the gut microbiota before. But turns out there's actually a bidirectional communication. There's a two-way communication among the gut microbiota, the gut itself, which is your second brain, and your first brain, which is the brain itself. In fact, a lot of Europeans would disagree with me. They consider probably the gut as actually your first brain. Remember this, the saying, trust your gut? That is it. So
simply meaning that you're going to have more one-way communication to the brain rather than you are away from the brain.
And the thing is, if you're looking at the effects of gut microbiota on the brain, this is exactly that axis that actually has been established to show that your gut microbiota is actually involved in the development of depression, for example, anxieties, and these have already been shown in studies. So the ways of communication, there are several ways of communication. For example, the first one, of course, the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve, right? That's from the brain to your gut. It's definitely parasympathetic. It relaxes things, and that's nervous. There's cortisol, which is, of course, your guys know this a lot, but cortisol is a means of communicating how stressed out something is. And cortisol not only actually contributes to the stress levels inside the intestine itself, it also changes the constitution of your gut microbiota. Then, of course, there are your immune cells, because the bacteria teaches your immune system, right? So there's an immune system communication. And then, of course, more recently, they have shown that there are molecules inside our cells called microRNAs that, for example, there's a syndrome called the leaky gut syndrome, where the barrier of your gut is actually leaky, meaning things can get in there. And they have shown that the molecule that actually cleaves that is a molecule called microRNA 155. And last year, a book came out on the leaky brain, and it turns out that that same molecule, microRNA 155, is the one cleaving the holes into your blood-brain barrier, causing you to have inflammation in the brain.
Wow.
So these are very new. Roland, for example, can elucidate, for example, how your lipopolysaccharides can affect the heart.
Yeah, they've come to find that inside of our cells, obviously, the bacteria contains these outer layers. They're called lipopolysaccharides, and they're on gram-negative bacteria, which make up to 80% of them in our system. And if they stay in the tube, providing you defecate and they leave, no big deal.
Very good.
However, as Dr. Ted mentioned, if you have gut permeability, leaky gut as it's known, The lipopolysaccharide can actually get out into the general circulation of our vasculature, and if it finds its way to specific organs, it can induce an inflammatory response. They're saying that it's probably one of the main endotoxins that's causing downstream effects of disease and inflammatory responses as a result of its general circulation, but can also induce physiological changes to like the structure of the brain. It can cause oxidation to the lipids and the proteins in the heart. So they're finding that people who have heart disease, anything cardiac based, they have evidence of bacteria and lipopolysaccharides that have translocated to the organ itself. And that might be the initial cause of the problem.
Is that the primary mechanism of causing these issues with poor gut health? Is it lipopolysaccharides being the primary thing, or is there other ones as well?
It's the body's response, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the body's response.
But that's the signal initiating the response?
These are signaling mechanisms that we have. It's an ecosystem in there, right? It's a very well-balanced ecosystem. In fact, to add to what Roland just said, they have just shown recently that after you eat, you are actually throwing low-level lipopolysaccharides, a small amount. It's enough to induce hermetic stress, meaning they will inflame your heart a bit and your other cells a little bit, but your body has defense mechanisms for those, right? It will shoot up its what's called the NRF2 pathway to actually dampen down that inflammatory response. And this has just been shown recently. We thought, that lipopolysaccharides were, it's abnormal. There has to be a leaky gut to do this. But they found out that even in a normal gut, you will
just eating, you're going to
eating, you're going to have some of it.
Postprandially, yes.
Yeah, so have some of it.
Regardless of what you're eating, you're getting some of it.
You bring up a good point. So here's something you said, you want your people to be able to take away a practical thing. The thing that increases postprandial lipopolysaccharide the most is saturated fat. So saturated fat has been villainized for years. We know it's not a problem, but let's say we have someone who's going into a high-fat diet, a ketogenic diet with a large quantity of MCT oils and butters and various saturated fat-based foods, and if they have a leaky gut, they're actually inducing their own permeability of lipopolysaccharide getting into the general circulation, because postprandially, saturated fat raises lipopolysaccharide levels.
So it would make a difference. My thought was, if it's going to raise it anyways,
Yeah.
Would it make a difference if they have leaky gut or not? Right? Would it be enhanced?
It would be like the amount of signal response the body
high.
would, yeah. So if you increase LPS, I call them little pieces of shit, not lipopolysaccharide, because it's easy to remember. If you increase LPS and more of it translocates out of your system, a clinical sign is if someone has high LDL, that's actually one reason or one way they hitch a ride around your system. So if you're doing that more frequently with high amounts of saturated fat, it would be worse. So you could hypothesize the reaction would be worse over a given time.
All right, so let's revert back here. So we know ketogenic dieting is massive now. Everyone's like ketogenic dieting, so there may be some implications there. But so for someone who's sitting home right now who doesn't know if they have leaky gut, what are some of the things that people should be looking for? And in your best estimate, is this something that it seems as though everyone's got some degree of permeability?
What I do is actually I do a stool test and take a look at whether or not, or even a simple zonulin test. Could actually show. Zonulin is the protein that's involved in binding together the tight junctions.
Yep.
So if you could see that the result is awry, you are suspecting that that's the case. But you could also see it in other indirect indicators. For example, fecal secretory IgA, for example, would rise with something like that. If you have chronic inflammation that's in there because of what's happening, there's another test that involves the eosinophils, these are white blood cells. So there are tests now that are available that shows whether or not you have a leaky gut or not, and it shows you also the degree. But the more important thing is when you do get a stool test, you get to take a look at the number of organisms, the diversity of your forest in there. The more diverse, the better it is for you. In fact, there is in the Hadzabe tribe in Africa, they have the Treponema species in their stool, and Treponema is the species for syphilis, right? But it's kept at bay by all the other organisms because they balance each other out. So when you wipe out something like you took an antibiotic, for example, and you wipe out your gut bacteria that way, you see how very quickly it could upset that balance. And as we said, it communicates to your immune system. Suddenly you're getting sicker. You took your antibiotics because you thought you were going to get better, then suddenly you're actually getting sicker. There are also studies now that are very interesting because they correlate, for example, antibiotic intake, which bombs your microbiota, and 10 years later you have obesity, you're fat. So these are very interesting takes.
So winding back a little bit, a lot of our listeners are probably going, okay, I want to have my microbiome checked, or I want to have my permeability checked. What is the best testing? You mentioned stool test, you mentioned Zymelin test. Should they do both? Should they check for IgA in the stool?
There are certain labs that will offer you, the line of the test is a leaky gut, and it will just get your stool, from that. I generally test it from stool.
We like to use Genova for the GIFX test. And there's another one, Great Plains Lab, that does a comprehensive stool analysis. So they're basically looking at the abundance of bacteria, the diversity. They're looking at inflammatory markers. They're looking at immune function, and you get a snapshot from that. But the best thing to do for most people is do a stool test. And if you want to do a leaky gut test, you can do what's called lactulose mannitol testing, where you can see if the sugar actually gets out of your small intestine and is present X number of hours later after the test.
Fascinating.
But I'm more, since I'm in my clients, they cannot stand long periods of testing. So if you could already see the gut is already leaky at the time, that you could actually institute a lot of measures in order to heal that. And when you do that, it's very, very simple principle. Principles, of course, you have to replenish them. You have to repair the gut. You have to replenish the microorganisms.
So that's simple to you, but that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume that most of the listeners are like, I got some degree of leaky gut. I've eaten some gluten. I've eaten some grains. I've eaten some of those things, and we could talk about that too. First line of defense or first immediate action steps to start reversing it, maybe just removing the stimulus.
Yeah, in addition to the leaky gut test, I actually get a food sensitivity test. Roland has a few clients that have done that as well. And what you do is that it's very difficult to go on a food elimination diet. For this number of days, you remove this, and for this number of days, you remove that. What I do is really very simple, because what can you remember, right, to do? So if you see that you're severely sensitive to milk, cheeses, cashew nuts or whatever, I just take them out for 6 months, and then reinstitute them 1 month at a time, and then every week. And then the distance between any two foods that you're sensitive to is like 4 days. So, and that's the way I do it. And the results are very dramatic. That alone, for example, I had a client that just took out all the foods that she was sensitive to, right? In a month, her waist size decreased by 2 inches. Why? Because the intestinal inflammation actually subsided. Mm-hmm. And she came to one of my lectures and was very proud and said, "What are you doing here?" I was just showing off my waist.
Why not, right?
Yeah, it's from just that.
So is it gluten? Is it undigested foods? Is it just foods that everyone's sensitive to?
Yes, kind of thing.
So let's talk about it.
The challenge is, so food is one arm, right? So if you have a whole bunch of food allergies, every time you eat that food, there's going to be an inflammatory response. So removing that is removing one aspect of inflammation. But like Ted mentioned before, we have a large diversity of microbes in our system. So there's another ratio that you can index to, like the Firmicutes to the Bacteroidetes family. Mm-hmm. So research has proven that if you're tipped in favor of one too highly, that can induce a lot of inflammation.
Either one.
More so Bacteroidetes, because you're going to ferment more carbohydrates and fibers. So a lot of people who instantly bloat after eating chickpeas, for example, or if they eat grains and they look like they're 4 months pregnant in a couple hours, they could be fermenting and creating a lot of toxic byproducts from that. So you also have to look at, are there aspects of dysbiosis or yeasts or parasites that also have to be addressed in order to be removed, because they'll also create an inflammatory response that will slowly actually cause more permeability to happen more frequently.
Dr. Ted, you're one of the most meticulous eaters that I've seen, and kudos to you, right? It's not easy to do. What diet do you attach to?
Actually, I call it micronutrient optimized. Okay, targeted macronutrient diet. That's one that I came up with, which I use for myself and I use for my clients. So micronutrient optimized means I get all of my vitamin, mineral, and cofactor levels tested, making sure that all of my micronutrients are there. Because from my experience, you know, I will never eat what's good for me. And if I am like that, my clients are the same. You know, you can never be sure that they will be taking. So why not just supplement them with what's missing? You know, if you could measure their levels, then you can give the right amount to them. You're not guessing, you know, anymore. This could be done right now for that kind of testing. And then so that's micronutrient optimization. Now, targeting your macronutrients. For example, if it's going to be so my first meal is usually highly fatty during the day. That is because I only eat within an 8-hour time window. And so I'm just extending my carbohydrate fast then, you know, as my first meal. And then my second meal is more carbohydrate, but it's very high fiber, you know, resistant starches and stuff like that. And my dinner is actually proteinaceous. So within the day, I cover the major macronutrients. But I used to run a lot before. If I was going to be on a run, then I would make my first meal be highly carbohydrate, so that my glycogen is actually loaded into my muscles, so that during the periods of sprints of the run, I have some fuel that's backing me up.
How much is the environment you're in influencing the microbiome? So, you know, when I speak about environment, I'm talking about you know, being outside versus inside. I'm talking about light. I'm talking about air quality, water quality. So we've talked a little bit about food, but walking in down that path of like, what are we doing that we don't know that's messing us up?
That's an interesting question. I mean, modern society, in terms of its environment, is not set up to optimize human health. You know, we're in a room right now with artificial lights that's being filtered through an HVAC system. So we're having to detoxify all these compounds. Your microbiome does play a large role in detoxifying things outside of what the liver has to tolerate. So imagine you're filling more and more into a pail, and then when you're doing, you know, poor environmental stuff from an airway perspective, you're drinking unfiltered water, you may be eating processed stuff, you're in an environment that's causing you stress, which is going to change your gut bacteria, you're adding to your chemical and stress load. So it's never going to push you in the right direction. So I think the most important thing is trying to understand what are the factors to offset that negative environment. So right now after this, we can go outside for a while. It's sunny in Tampa, it's cold as hell in Toronto, so I haven't been outside. Going out in the natural light is actually going to improve all aspects of our physiological health, because our mitochondria can take the light energy and actually turn that into energy for the body. You know, if we're drinking water, tap water has got chlorine and fluoride in it in most municipalities. Simply filtering your water through a reverse osmosis system is actually going to impact the microbiome positively, because chlorine's an antimicrobial agent.
I turned on the shower this morning and the smell of chlorine was unbelievable.
Shower filter, something as simple as a chlorine shower filter, because your skin has a microbiome
So
on
we have
it.
the shower filter, and we got a notice in the mail that said, you know, from the 15th to the 30th of April, there's going to have extremely high levels of chlorine in the water. So it's still safe to drink.
Yeah.
But literally, I could smell it. I was like, God, thank God I'm not drinking this stuff.
There's also an article recently, actually, speaking of showers, like how much of the skin microbiota should we really remove and how much are good for us?
Yes.
You know, that is a very interesting article, because is actually interested more, rather than gut microbiota, in skin microbiota. And I just found out from that article that we're forbidden to actually put living organisms in the, you know, in the face creams, et cetera. But we have those that naturally protect our skin, maintain our barriers, and so on. Is actually, if you take a look at the skin as an inverted gut, it's the same thing. You know, you're absorbing things from your skin. In fact, one of the things that I tell my patients is that don't put anything in your skin that you wouldn't eat, you know, because it's just the reverse thing, right? So why would you be putting all of these toxic chemicals if you're not going to be eating them? So, you know, you're going to be absorbing them anyway.
So let's go down that route, because you've told me some really interesting things about skin microbiota. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because most people don't even know that exists. And One thing you mentioned to me previously, I think it was October, is how these things are interacting and maybe rubbing against other people. There's been some research saying how
Yes.
that can be influenced. Can you talk about that?
Yes, there was a study on the Hmong immigrants. If you watch Gran Torino, it was the Hmong tribe, right? And they found out that the study was done in Minnesota, and when they came into the United States, they actually got all of this testing of the microbiota, gut microbiota, skin microbiota, and so on. And of course, their body mass index and all the measures, health measures were taken. And then of course, they had a very different microbiota profile, both their skin and their gut. And even if they live in separate communities, and even if they did not eat the common foods that being eaten by the native Minnesotans, they actually were out there in society, interacting with them, etc. And they found out that so over time, their skin microbiota began to mirror, those who were actually born in Minnesota and those that were actually skin started to look the same.
Right? Yeah.
And then their gut microbiota, because you lick your fingers or whatever, their gut microbiota started changing and started mirroring, of course, the people from Minnesota, especially those that are obese, and apparently those are highly pathogenic. They're very invasive. They like colonizing the gut quite a bit. So and they found out that the obese Hmong, those that became obese during the time here, had the same distribution of microbiota as the obese Minnesotans.
Was that to do with just what they're eating, or
Just with the skin.
Or
Just
their
with the skin.
diet didn't become more Americanized, like they didn't start eating like McDonald's like everybody else?
No, they for those that became obese, no, they live in very isolated communities.
Okay.
So that was just skin. That study was pure skin.
What is
not porn,
interesting
but
though?
skin.
If someone's born cesarean section, the first person to hold them actually can inoculate them with the skin biome of whoever it is. So people who have cesarean births are more likely to have, as Dr. Ted mentioned, autoimmune diseases, asthma, allergies, inflammatory reactions, because their first colonization is skin bacteria. So it goes to show you that the human body has very carefully selected where it places bacteria in order to optimize the organism. And if we start to mess with that, be it environmentally, dietarily, interacting with other people, it shifts the balance of it day to day. And it's how often you engage in those habits ultimately dictate what it looks like 5-10 years down the line.
Super fascinating. Glyphosate, I'm going to bring that up. Like anything that's an antibiotic, anything that's killing our microbiome.
Oh, Roundup.
Yeah, let's go down that route. So, how much of a problem is it in America and worldwide, and what do people need to know, and how can we combat it?
Well, the simple fact that it's outlawed in some countries is probably enough to know what you should think about it, like as a general thing. So the problem with glyphosate is it's sprayed on a lot of high-yield crops for North American farmers. Breads, soy, things that are non-organic, commercially grown. And the reason glyphosate is so effective is it essentially instantly kills the pesticides that would tear apart the crops. So it's said to be safe for human consumption, but the problem with glyphosate is this. It's actually an antibacterial, and it stops bacteria from being able to proliferate, colonize, and divide. We have bacteria that lines our system, and one thing that no one knows is, or not no one, but very few, is there's a pathway called the succinate pathway. And that takes amino acids and it turns them into compounds like neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. Bacteria in our gut actually do that. Like 90% of the serotonin we make is digested in our system. 50% of the dopamine is. Some of the norepinephrine based upon the stress response. So if you inhibit those pathways, then coming back to what Ted said before, you totally disrupt the communication between the gut-brain axis. So if you're having bread every day, if you're having soy proteins, if you're having glyphosate-laden things day in, day out for months, years, you've totally disrupted your microbiome. And what you do is you shrink the diversity and you increase the abundance of the potentially pathogenic resistant bacteria that usually are correlated with health problems.
Ted, what do you think about glyphosate?
I think Roland said
he nailed it.
Yes, he said everything that needed to get said about it. The thing that I am worried about is that it's just already seeped into our food chain. It has already gone into the water supplies. Has already gone everywhere, and we still sell it. So when do we expect this problem to end? It probably won't. And you probably, soon you'll probably see bacteria that are resistant to glyphosate.
So that was my question next, was how much of a concern is it in the organic population of food? So is organic food even a real thing? Because obviously we know that there's some questionable regulations.
No, there's this funny article. It's funny, but I found it funny, but actually serious.
Terrifying.
Really scary, because much of the organic food that we're growing are actually grown under plastic tarp.
Right.
And I said, why don't we just start testing from there?
Right.
So I don't know. So that's why I said we could actually test for the presence of those toxins in our systems. And what we can do is actually fortify our defenses, in terms of being able to eliminate, excrete, or detoxify them as fast as we can. Although there are some molecules that our bodies evolved, and there are some molecules that they're synthetic, they can't make heads or tails of it. What is this?
Speaking about fortifying our defenses, Roland, what are some things people should be doing to fortify their defenses against all these environmental toxins? You mentioned plastics and BPA. Any suggestions on immediate lines of application?
Yeah, the most important thing is supporting your detoxification processes, which comes from, if we're looking at dietarily, optimizing your micronutrient status and essential amino acids. So most of the detoxification that goes on, your body will take a compound, it will modify it, that's then becoming water soluble. So it takes an amino acid or a nutrient, a phytonutrient for lack of a better description, and it sticks that to the compound so you can remove it. So if someone's on a low protein diet, if they're not eating a lot of colorful plant foods, those things are going to be slowed down, as well as increasing your native antioxidant support systems. So glutathione, which is amino acid support, superoxide dismutase, catalase, these are the main antioxidants in the system, as well as vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin C, coenzyme Q10, alpha lipoic acid. These are needed every day to offset the metabolic damage from these compounds. On top of that, you need to make sure that you are actually feeding your microbiome. So when you're thinking about food, don't just think about your macros. Think about, if my bacteria need fiber, I need to feed my bacteria. So it could be fiber from broccoli, it could be fiber from spinach, it could be fiber from apple pectin and fruits. Root vegetables have a great tuber fiber, right? So you need to diversify the fibers, so this way, if you are having a scenario where your microbiome is getting bombed by compounds, you give it a fighting chance to feed them so they have the energy to make the compounds that improve the health and well-being of your digestive system.
Two things. Number one, if you feed your kids cotton candy that's blue dye, the body has not encountered blue dye ever, your kid will pee blue, right? And that's just, the liver doesn't know what to do with it. So you're taxing the liver in that way. The second thing, which is relevant to what Roland just said, is that bacteria produce certain things for us that we cannot produce for ourselves. For example, vitamin B12 is produced by bacteria. For example, that the butyrates that are produced by bacteria in the colon, these are what's called the short-chain fatty acids, right, from the fermentation of fiber and so on. Short-chain fatty acids is the main food of your colonocytes, or the cells lining your colon, and you could take a look at all the studies now. If you have 0 to low butyrate production, your risk for colon cancer is very high. And so you see a lot of these colon cancer patients. Actually, the history always points to the lack of fiber in the diet. I'm very strict with fiber, actually, not only because they nourish the bacteria, but the bacteria produce a lot of stuff for you.
Supplementally or just diverse foods?
Diverse foods if you can, but it's very hard to meet the minimum of 34 grams of fiber a day. So you have to chew a lot of leaves to do that. So what I do is I actually do supplementation myself in order just to meet the minimum.
Do we know the mechanism of, this is a little off topic, but do we know the mechanism that the vagus nerve is influencing the microbiome? So, we talk about the parasympathetic being rest and digest. Is it in the way that it's influencing a hormonal cascade in the stomach, or because you talked
No,
about
it's directly by its action of rest and digest. Because if your epinephrine is because if it's highly peristaltic, if it moves a lot, then you will move a lot of when you poop. 50% of your gut microbiota comes out. So you're actually 1 to 2 pounds lighter. So, and you got to replace those. Those will have to replenish themselves, right? So, so when your vagus nerve is actually on, it means that they actually are giving these bacteria time to rest and digest your food, right? Before you actually poop them out.
The lack of parasympathetic signal, which is driven by high amounts of cortisol and epinephrine, will modulate the gut very aggressively. So it's found that you can have, let's talk with exercise for a moment. If you exercise, blood goes where? To the working muscles. So it actually gets shunted away from your stomach. So you have what's called temporary hypoxia in the gut, which also is in conjunction with a release of cortisol, because when you train, you stress your system, your body wants to raise blood sugar levels.
Right.
So what ends up happening is those signals, if experienced long enough, can modulate a shift in the gut bacteria, which can also increase or decrease inflammation depending on what the goal is, and can cause temporary permeability in the gut as well. So activating the parasympathetic signal will slow the peristaltic rhythm if it's too much. Lack of parasympathetic is when it just shoots right through you. Or the other side of it is you get super constipated, and then things sit there and ferment, and the bacteria is influenced by, for lack of a better description, a septic system that's backed up. So if you don't have that parasympathetic signal, the regulation of your gut bacteria is irregular.
I'm just trying to bridge the gap in my mind between how people with serotonin deficiencies and anxiety and stress can simply mitigate that by starting incorporating something that's a parasympathetic stimulus.
Actually, one of the best stimuli to use is actually singing your voice. You sing in the shower.
Serenade us, Ted. Let's go.
I'll go. No, I'm joking. I'm not doing that.
No, because the recurrent laryngeal nerve is it's a vagal stimulus. So in fact, there's a often people cardiologists always have forgotten about this, but it's a very, very common condition. They throw the book at the patient thinking the patient has a heart condition, is having a heart attack and so on, but it's called gastrocardia. It's a very old condition, or the Rome-Held syndrome. That's because actually of the vagus nerve that's actually misfiring, and thinking that you're actually having a heart condition. But of course, the vagus nerve also supplies the heart, right? Since it's very, very long, it's from the brain. It's the longest nerve, the longest nerve in the that comes from the brain. In terms of being a cranial nerve, right? It's a cranial nerve 10. And the people have been asking me always, so how do you relieve that? And lucky for us, evolution granted us like a few new wires in there that's actually related to our voice. So if you're actually using your voice and singing, etc., that induces a parasympathetic response.
Interesting. Is that why mantras and meditation?
Yes, humming is another thing.
Humming,
and deep breathing while humming is like the best combo, right? Because the deep breathing stimulates that tone.
These are very simple things.
These ancient people figured this out without us ever
They
having
know a couple of things.
Science didn't know much.
Double-blind crossover study wasn't needed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So walking down the path that we wanted to ultimately get to, this study, the crosstalk between the microbiome and the mitochondria
Yes.
during exercise.
Yes. Some of my clients are actually, their most common problem really is that they're overtraining. And one of the principal things that you need to know in overtraining is, of course, your mitochondrial function. And mitochondria produces the power for you to be able to do your training, right? And from the point of view of health optimization, mitochondria are actually bacteria that live inside your cells. So if the gut bacteria are called exosymbionts, they live outside your cells, outside of you, right? Of your cells. The mitochondria are endosymbionts. They live inside your cells, and they behave like bacteria. So, they divide, they fuse together, they exchange it. They have their own DNA, they have their own genetic material that's being exchanged. And this paper is that these two groups of bacteria, one inside the cell and one outside the cell, are actually communicating with each other. And this is a very recent finding, because we thought, hey, these things don't communicate at all, but they do. And it's very, very important for during overtraining, because what happens is that when you overtrain, you're not asking just one set of mitochondria to produce energy for the entire body. You're asking the entire body to produce energy. So mitochondrial functions upregulated in all of those. And what happens when you have a factory that's producing a lot of energy for you, it will have lots of garbage. It will have lots of reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species, right? These are the things that are thrown off when you're producing energy. Of course, any energy producing factory will have that, right? But the body is wise. At low levels, what it does, it uses this garbage, this as signaling mechanisms to tell the nucleus of the cell, hey, we're already at capacity here. Don't demand more energy from us. So there's a communication between the mitochondria and the nucleus itself as far as how much energy generation. However, when these are actually the cells that are lining your intestine, they're full of mitochondria, right? So when they're throwing up too much garbage when you're exercising, guess what happens? You will start developing a leaky gut, right? Because the inflammation begins, and then your bacteria are there. The bacteria are there, and they will do their thing. We're being given access. We don't know why, but we're going to do our thing.
Sure, we're going to go where we want to go.
Yeah. Even if there's no leaky gut, they can communicate via those short-chain fatty acids, And your bile is also, when bile also actually digested by these bacteria, they can communicate back to the mitochondria with secondary bile acids, like, hey, we're good here. So the tight junctions in your epithelial, in your lining of the intestines actually remain intact. But you say, no, you're inflamed. We're already imbalanced here. Let's go play. And soon you notice that your performance decreases. You start getting sick a lot more, because you have a lot more chronic inflammation. And that's where you have to stop. That's why periodizing training, all of these kinds of things that you came up with a long time ago, this is now the cellular and bacterial basis, in fact, for these kinds of things that we need to do.
Brilliant. Absolutely amazing. Roland, what are your main takeaways for people looking to optimize their mitochondria and optimize their body composition? And as we integrate the conversation around mitochondria, microbiome, and brain, some lifestyle takeaways that people can apply almost immediately. Not that I want to wrap it up, but we're on a bit of a time crunch.
No worries. Some of the most important things are thinking about, like I think Ted said at the beginning, your gut is its own organ, and there's an organ within the organ. So if you eat the same 6 foods every day, broccoli, chicken, oatmeal, blah, 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 the typical bodybuilding diet, you're giving yourself a very sparse diversity of foods, and you shift your bacteria in a negative way.
What if people don't notice a difference right away?
If they don't notice a difference right away,
perhaps what type of symptoms should be looking for? Like you mentioned about the gas production.
Yeah, so I mean, a leaky gut can have, it can be asymptomatic until the inflammatory load gets so high that something goes. But typically what I see with my clients, because I always like to talk about where the rubber meets the road, brain fog, headaches transiently, snap mood changes, fatigue with no pattern to it, joint aches and pains, changes in their skin, a little bit of a dullness in the eye, short-term memory, things like that.
And always getting infected by viruses, So for my clients, they go, Dr. Ted, I didn't really get any benefits from you last year. I've been here with you for a year. I'm not getting any benefits. And you go, well, how many times did you get sick before you came to me? Oh, about 6 times a year. How many times did you get sick last year? Oh my God, 0. And that's what this does. This is a rear view mirror thing. You can't, as I like to say always, if the World Trade Center weren't bombed, right, no one will ever know the extent to which people tried to prevent it. because it's just standing there, right? But all the things that are happening underneath, people would never know. And that's the same thing with treating your gut microbiota, treating your mitochondria and all of that. It's a rear view mirror.
Yeah.
It's dramatic when it's bombed, right? You'll see disease right away. You see cancers. You see all of these things cropping up in your system. But if you do the proper prevention for it, and it's slow, and what I usually tell them is, look, it took your body what? How many years to get to this state? You want to have a feeling of improvement overnight? Well, you can't.
Is it possible for someone in the current day and age to actually have a healthy microbiome and gut wall?
I believe it is. I do believe it is. It just takes some more consideration from a dietary, a rest perspective. I mean, we didn't talk about sleep, but if you don't sleep and you start trashing your cortisol levels, dropping your testosterone levels, that influences your gut microbiota negatively. So sleep and growth hormone are super important to optimize.
You know what it sounds like? It sounds like all these things are some way integrated.
Yes.
That's the problem. It's never, you can't separate these things, right? So yeah.
I made this summary, actually. The first thing I say is sleep well, right? And what you do, I created a technique called sleep anchoring technique. What you do, and this is very practical, is to treat the time that you sleep as the beginning of your day. That way, you make it important, right? So sleep well. And when you wake up, hydrate well. And then as he said, eat well. And then you can add to that sun well, where our bodies are yoked to the sun. Vitamin D is about 500 million years old in our genes, and we have them. It's very important. It controls about 2,000 genes in our body. Ground well, take off your shoes and walk, barefoot.
Barefoot through the concrete jungle.
Go barefoot.
Avoid nails, but yeah.
No, here in Tampa at the beach, right? And then you should relate well, with other people, because relationships, your cortisol levels rise. It's not worth it, right?
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you, man.
And move well.
Exercise.
Exercise, and then breathe well. And I mean that in two ways. You meditate. Focus on your breathing and so on and so forth. And of course, purify the air that you're breathing. Right. I used to get grossed out by this advertisement that showed feminine hygiene product, emitting flowers. And it's like, I'm breathing that. Please don't, not during dinner. But anyway, the last is love well.
Yeah.
And when you do that, those are the simple things that you can do in your life and your lifestyle. But remember one thing: well can now be measured. Eating well can be measured. Relating well can be measured. You can actually see all of those with the metabolites your body's throwing off.
I want to add one quick thing to that is just to finish up what Ted said, if someone wants to get a qualification and a quantification for what's going on inside of them, it pays to learn a little bit about your health as an N equals 1, an individual. So test yourself to see where you are to get a baseline to start, and then employ all these things regardless, because it's never going to push you in the wrong direction, right? It's small things accumulate up to a large, massive whole, and that's what you want to do when it comes to health and moving things back in the direction of better gut function, better mitochondrial function.
I view both of you guys as guys who do a lot of things well to optimize your life, to optimize your energy, to optimize your health, your vitality. What are one of the things, or 3 of the things, people should be doing to truthfully embrace this wonderful existence we have and live their greatest life?
First, you got to meet Ben.
He gives the best hugs, I'll say that.
I'm hungry.
No, I think the first thing, for me, it's always perspective, is take a look at yourself and your life and what you want to make of it or not, and where you are. Take a stock and get an assessment. Second, after you've done that, then my usual video game analogy goes. I live my life like a video game, right? Life, I only have one, right? And therefore, I do not place myself at unnecessary risk. Sure, I'll go bungee jumping, but I am not going to put myself in a situation that is actually uncertain. Risk is calculable, uncertainty isn't. So this coming from someone who taught statistics, trust me. So life, right? In your video game, how many lives do you have, right? Unfortunately, we only have one. So the second one is actually health, right? So when you're playing Pac-Man, right? You eat all those cherries, et cetera, to make yourself stronger. So keep yourself healthy, in order to have that energy, et cetera, to do what you want to do. And the last one is time, So how much time do you have in order to do what you want to do? Do you want to do that time, to do what you do in that time in an unhealthy way, in a painful way, or do you want it, in a high quality way? So life, health, and time, the three elements of a video game exactly, which is how I live my life, right?
Roland, you have one to add for that?
Yeah, I would say the one thing is humans like to make meanings of things that are very personalized to them. So when it comes to the health of this thing, I kind of look at this as like...
Sometimes they use other people's meanings
exactly, and they adopt things that they don't necessarily philosophically agree with or understand. I look at this as kind of like an avatar, right? This is my rental that I got in this life. Got one, like Ted said. So the things that I know make it feel the best from a diet, exercise, sleep, supplementation, mindfulness, enjoyment, love, relationship side of things, I push myself to do all of those as they relate to me. It's not going to be as it relates to you, as it relates to Ted. But what it does is you treat the machine like a well-oiled piece. And then the things that make your life worth living, getting out of bed every day with a sense of purpose, being grateful for things, it just sweetens the deal, because thoughts direct where energy goes, and energy can be very beneficial or it can be very harmful to you.
Ted, you are like one of the original biohackers.
Yes.
Tell our listeners one hack, or maybe a couple hacks, that you would suggest that everyone maybe hasn't tried, or some things that you recommend that actually are efficacious.
Oh, quick one. Well, he stole it. If you want,
I do.
if you want an instant brain boost, for example, you have to think clearly in the next 30 minutes or so. Chew a little bit of nicotine gum. Not too much, because it will send you to the toilet.
Like 1 milligram?
Or fog up the car like happened to you in California.
So I tried my first nicotine gum when we were on the way to the gym at 6 a.m. or something in California. I was literally sitting there. It wasn't cold outside. It was probably 65 degrees, and I fogged up the whole car.
Driving time. Why is that true? At least we know you can make heat.
Yes,
exactly.
but because nicotine can actually raise the dopamine levels in your brain by 25 to 40%, and that's how strong it is.
Yeah.
In fact, as this is as a hack. For
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then my second is one that's a favorite of many, is use coffee judiciously. I know that they recommend just 1 cup of coffee a day. Don't take coffee, but coffee is a very, it produces a power surge in you. So when you need to be not for staying up late, because that is going to disrupt your sleep, but if you need a power surge quickly, 20 minutes. For example, if you just eaten lunch, right, and you take coffee thereafter, you take your nap. It takes about 20 minutes for coffee to kick in, and then use that coffee surge to actually start doing work again. These are simple things.
Ted, what do people need to do to fix their energy?
How much time you got?
I think to fix energy, you have 2 paths, right? You can do it the difficult way, which
Why are you
is...
pointing at me when you say that?
He was pointing in your general direction. It could have been me. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel you, man. Keep grasping at that air, right? Like you say.
No.
Sure. Hey, man, I know what your body language is saying.
You can do it. As they say, there are ways of fixing energy, right? The difficult way is by not what you think. It's by asceticism. You're denying yourself things, right?
Right.
This is what the nuns do, and so on. And so they shut down the senses in that case. In fact, that's exemplified by what's called a common vehicle Buddhism, right? That's they deny the senses. That's why people get very confused, because this is just one of the ways by which you could probably cleanse up your energy, right? And then the other one, of course, is you actually wish for everyone else to be happy like you, or you have good intentions not only for yourself but for everyone else, and therefore you want to purify yourself, you're by doing good deeds and doing good works, etc., etc. And that's the essence of Mahayana Buddhism, has already been captured in that. And then there's also the path where you use whatever is available in you, whether it be anger, pleasure, pain, etc., and you transmute those into energy. Yeah. You transmute all of those to energy. And in Vajrayana Buddhism, for example, it's why not transmute pleasure instead? Why have anger, pain, etc., when you could transmute pleasure into energy? So if you like what you do, if you're enjoying, doing your work, or playing with your kids, or doing whatever, that can be transmuted into energy that can also lift you up.
Roland, you're one of the most well-studied, fastest learners, and that could be wrong, but it seems like you're just this guy who picks up on things really, really quick. What's your favorite hack for your brain, for optimizing learning, for optimizing your brain?
One of the things that I've found to be very beneficial is to get myself into a keto-adapted state and learn to be metabolically flexible once again. I used to have issues where there were scenarios of brain fog and things of that nature, and you'd read something and it would just be vanished. Very much tied to blood sugar, very much tied to constantly eating. Experimenting with fasting, low-carb dieting, things of that nature, I found to be almost like a massive reset to me, so that I never feel dips in energy. Because one of the things I always want to be able to do is to recall something on demand, or to be having the focus, the motivation, and the ability to start reading and amassing and keeping information. So, this thing produces energy, and the brain is the most energy-hungry organ. Lowering inflammation, learning how to go longer without food is actually seemingly transferred into much greater ability for me to amass everything I read.
I'm so grateful for you guys. I love you, Ted. I love you, Roland. Thank you for being here. Guys, have a wonderful day. Huge thank you and a shout out to Dr. Ted Achacoso, Roland Pankewich, and I'm going to link to everything where you can reach these guys on the show notes at benpakulski.com/podcast. Peace. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that episode. Some of the great takeaways from this episode: our exercise is influencing our microbiome. What a concept. How our sympathetic life that we typically live, this state of high sympathetic arousal and high stress, is impacting negatively our microbiome and how we interact with the world. It's so interesting to realize that our microbiome actually lives on our skin as well, and that's interacting with the world, and maybe that's as important as what's happening inside of our gut. Massively important stuff. We also talked a little bit about LPS, lipopolysaccharide, and how that is the key indicator of whether or not we have leaky gut, and perhaps not living our greatest life. So looking into some testing mechanisms, and Dr. Ted recommends a stool analysis. There's some blood tests you guys can do that I actually do to check my leaky gut symptoms. We also dove into a few of those key biohacks that these gentlemen are doing to live their greatest life in this amazing vessel that we have. So I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I know you're gonna wanna go back and listen to it again. And when you do, go ahead and take some notes, share with a friend of yours, because we love sharing this information with you, and we're so grateful that you're able to keep it going. Go give Roland a share on Instagram. Unfortunately, Dr. Ted doesn't do too much social media these days, but I'm trying to convince him to get on there, because as you see, this guy is an absolute wealth of information. Have an awesome day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning into the Muscle Expert Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Pakulski. Live your greatest life in your greatest body. Talk to you soon.